All right, everybody, welcome back to Leading the Charge. I'm your host, Brandis P. Bonos. Got a big show coming up for you guys today. Hope you guys are excited. Today, we're going to be talking about the infighting going on in the Groyper America First movement with Nick Fuentes. Yes, it may sound surprising, it may come as a shock to you, but there is infighting currently going on in the Groyper movement between Nick and his community. And the infighting is pretty interesting. It is a kind of fight. It is a kind of split between the Wignats, and I'll tell you what that is in a moment, and the Groypers. Now, there is a large overlap between the two. If you were to put these two groups, the Wignats and the Groypers, on a distribution, on a bell curve, you would see a lot of people from each side hovering around the middle of the distribution. Be that as it may, there is a lot of infighting going on in Nick's community. You know, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here. Every other video, it feels like I'm talking about Nick Fuentes, but there's nothing else to talk about. We bombed Iran. There's nothing happening. There's nothing happening with Iran, and their country is on the verge of collapse. They're having a power shortage supply, they're having a power supply shortage. The power grids are collapsing. They're having a water supply shortage. Their currency is worth almost nothing. 300,000 rial equates to $1. People are rapidly getting rid of their rials. They're selling off their savings in exchange for dollars, which is tanking the rial even more. You have the fact that there was the Trump-Putin summit last Friday, which was a big nothing burger. Nothing at all happened there. Big waste of time, all kabuki theater. And then, of course, there's the Epstein files, which are becoming less and less relevant as the days go by. You have the situation with Israel and Palestine. We still don't have a ceasefire there. Israel's talking about occupying the Gaza Strip. And you have Trump tariffing all of our allies, which is creating more friction. I mean, now South Korea and Japan are talking about nuclearizing after 50, 60 years of committing to non-nuclearization, non-proliferation. And the three principles in Japan are: we refuse to produce, possess, or host any kinds of nuclear weapons. Now they're thinking about amending that because the United States has not really done a good job supporting Ukraine. Our country, our government, has refused to send Ukraine certain weapons because they are afraid about the potential for escalation with Russia. We're not going to send them certain kinds of weapons to defend themselves. We're going to handicap and limit the capabilities of the kind of weapons that we send to Ukraine because it could lead to further escalation. In my opinion, that's an America First movement, so I'm not totally against that, but obviously Japan and South Korea and some of our other allies have issues with that. Anyways, so that's the whole deal. There's nothing really to talk about. Nothing interesting is really happening. And so that leaves me with nothing else to talk about but Nick Fuentes. And this guy is all the hype right now. And I've talked about Nick on many occasions. I think Nick is a very entertaining figure. He's very polarizing. I have watched many of his streams. I watch his stream virtually every single night. I'm a huge fan of Nick's. But I do have a lot of disagreements with him and his movement. And we're going to get into those right now. But before I get into it, I do want to say this as far as Wignats are concerned. For those of you who aren't familiar with far-right terminology, a Wignat is effectively somebody who is comically far-right, like ultra-far-right. People who are doing the Hitler salute in public. They're decked out in these, Nazi outfits, these Nazi fatigues. These guys are complete nutbags. These guys are posted up in these photos with AK-47s and all this other kind of military weaponry, decked out. They got the mask on. They're doing the Hitler salute and all these kinds of weird white power symbols and stuff like that. Real freaks, like really fringe, freakish people. Not normal by any standards whatsoever. And then you have the Groypers, and these guys are kind of like revanchists. They are anti-immigration. They are white nationalists, which I think is just white supremacists. and I'll explain that further in a moment. But they're white nationalists. They're a little bit more white collar. They're a little bit more buttoned up. They're not as militant, and they're not as, let's just put it this way, they're not as insane. They're not as delusional. So this is kind of the fight that's going on right now in Nick's movement. And 2 days ago, Nick posted a video titled, "We Have to Move Past Anger and Resentment." And in that video, he basically goes through his entire history, right? He goes through an abridged version of his history, going all the way back to 2017 and his days at RSBN at Right Side Broadcast Network with Cassie Dillon, with Ben Shapiro, and his opportunity to launch himself into the conservative ecosystem, and how because he called out Israel and asked the wrong questions, he was effectively sidelined and slandered and treated as an outsider. And because of that, because that happened to him at such a young age, because he was slandered, because he was kicked while he was down, because people threw dirt in his face, he became a more radical figure. That radicalized him further. And so Nick, for the past 7 to 10 years, has effectively garnered an audience. He has developed an audience. He has cultivated a cult of personality because of his radical ideology, because of his political incorrectness and his lack of inhibitions and his unwillingness to pull his punches. He just says whatever he wants. And that has garnered him a lot of fame. It's brought him a lot of success. It has brought him a lot of notoriety and infamy. But on the other hand, it has, in a sense, locked him out of the broader conversation, the more mainstream conversation. And so now that Nick is kind of being brought back into the fold with this meteoric rise that he has experienced over the past 3 months, with everything that's gone on, with the Epstein files, with the war in Iran, with Ukraine and Russia, with Israel and Palestine, with immigration, with the protests in LA, with everything that's been happening, he has garnered a lot of attention. But really everything that happened with Israel and Iran, and his willingness and his fervor to just go deep into all these different problems and to give people details and insight that they probably weren't aware of prior to watching his show, that is what brought him a lot of success. And his analysis and his passion and his commentary and his charisma, it attracted a much larger audience because he wasn't talking about all these radical things. He wasn't talking about race realism and why black people and white people shouldn't have kids and all this other kind of stuff. All this other kind of far-right, white nationalist adjacent stuff. And because he was using his talent and using his skills to talk about subjects that, appealed to a much larger audience, he was able to garner success and attention that way. And since that has happened, since that has occurred, he has taken it upon himself to censor himself a little bit, to water down his delivery a little bit, to change his approach, to change his tone a little bit into something that's a little bit more, how do I put it? Something that's a little bit more sanitized, a little bit more amicable, a little bit more respectable, less crude, less abrasive, if you will. And now that he has reached a point where he has basically kicked through the door, he has emerged as one of the major figures in conservative politics today, he understands very clearly that now is the time to make his name a household name. Now is the time to reform his image, to rebrand himself, to change the movement, to transmute the America First movement into something that is a bit more all-encompassing for a larger array of people, to different demographics and different populations, not just ultra far-right young white men. And now that he's taken it upon himself to do that, he has ruffled some feathers in his community, and his community feels as if he is turning their backs on them, and they made that very clear in this video that I'm going to react to in a few seconds or in a few minutes. Be that as it may, there's a few more things I want to point out before I get into the video, and I'll just put it to you this way. With Nick and everything that's gone on, my opinion has always been this. I like the fact that Nick keeps it real. I like the fact that he keeps it 1,000. He calls out the BS. He calls out the hypocrisy on the right. He calls out people like J.D. Vance. He calls out people like Charlie Kirk for being this champion of debating in the free marketplace of ideas, but always running away from a debate with him. And he calls out the fact that the United States, and more specifically the Trump administration, has spent the past 10 years talking about deporting illegal immigrants and building a wall, and they're yet to do it. And he's talked about how Trump has run on a anti-war platform, yet he's bombing Yemen, he's bombing Iran, he's giving more weapons and ammunition to Israel to continue their genocidal campaign in Gaza. And he talks about all these things, and I like how he keeps it real because I agree with him on many of these issues. I agree with him on many of the things he says about geopolitical analysis, or on geopolitics rather. But then he casts this long shadow where he says some of the most outlandish things one could possibly hear. He says things that worry me, to put it to you plainly. He says things that concern me. He says things that worry me, quite frankly. And he says things like the economic destiny of black people is poverty. Black people are incapable of building civilization. Black people are a permanent underclass. Having sex with a black person, more specifically a black man, is like having sex with a dog. He has said all of these things. And when I hear things like that, I don't know if he says those things because he genuinely feels that way. I'm inclined to believe that's the case. Or if he says these things because he just wants to placate his far-right audience. I'm inclined to believe the former. And the reason why is because you don't spend 7, 8, 9, 10 years drilling into your audience's mind that black people are a lower race, are a undignified race, and you just do it ironically. There's no way. Not for that long, not for that length of time. There's just no way. So I am inclined to believe that these are his genuine beliefs. And now that he's kind of broken into the mainstream, he's breached containment, to put it the way he does. Now that he's breached containment and he has achieved a meteoric ascendancy, now he's going to kind of recede a little bit. He's going to pull back a little bit on all this racist and provocative language so that he has the ability to increase his longevity and his appeal now that he's broken into the mainstream. And the reason why he's doing this, I suspect, is because not everybody has the opportunity to last in political media. And you can see it with Reagan Conrad. When Brett Cooper left the Daily Wire in December 2024 and Reagan Conrad took over the comment section, which is the show that Brett Cooper used to host, I mean, her fame, her clout literally dried up in like 3-4 months. This is a channel that has 4 million subscribers. They get contracts from the Daily Wire. They're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to tow conservative talking points. And now this girl's only getting 20,000 to 30,000 views a video on a channel that has almost 4 million subscribers. And so you have to think to yourself, you must understand that in conservative politics, there's no guarantee. You could get censored. You could get debanked. You could get deplatformed off of X, off of Instagram, off of Facebook at any moment, at the drop of a hat, the moment a new administration takes over, or the moment Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg decide they want to flip back to the left. So the wise thing to do when you understand how fickle this entire industry is to take that opportunity, take that limited window of time you have, and go all out. And try to turn your movement into something that is just progressive and revolutionary and has a mass appeal and becomes ubiquitous. Not something that only appeals to a small, radical niche of people. So that's what Nick is doing. And you must understand, Nick is not plugged in the same way that Charlie Kirk or Ben Shapiro or Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson are. Nick is an outsider. Nick is not connected to the Heritage Foundation or Cato Institute or Hudson Institute or Daily Wire or TPUSA or Prager University. He's not clicked in with any of those people. That old guard, that old establishment where Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro, now Jordan Peterson, and Tucker Carlson kind of made their money. They made their connections over there even with Bill Kristol and Fox News and Rupert Murdoch. Nick had no attachments, no ties to any of that. And so those people, they're fine. Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, his children, obviously, and Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro, all those people are going to be totally fine. They're plugged in, they're connected, they have all these kinds of contacts with people who are in positions of power that Nick simply doesn't have. They can pull strings in ways that Nick simply cannot. So Nick is making the smart play here. He's making the strategic, the tactical calculation to increase his ability to remain relevant for as long as possible. With that said, this decision to pivot and to rebrand the Groyper movement into something that purges its radical elements, something that purges its extremist, Wignat followers, has caught him a lot of flack. And so we're going to get into that right now. You guys will be able to see my live reaction to it. But I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of context before I started the reaction. But with that said, we're going to get into it. And pay close attention. By the way, I'm going to start this video. I'm going to start this video at the 10-minute mark because I've seen this video multiple times already. And basically for the first 10 minutes of the video, Nick spends the majority of his time talking about how, basically the way he starts it is he gets a super chat, and the super chat was talking about how Nick has basically gone mainstream with black people now. He has a black following. He has a black audience, people who like the fact that he keeps it real. We're talking about the Cartier family, and there's a couple other content creators on YouTube who have reacted to Nick's monologue. Famously, Nick had a monologue from about a week or two ago, and in it, he basically was talking about how the issue that most people have with Black Americans and Black culture is that it isn't to say that their skin color is the issue or the fact that they're black. That's not the primary issue. The primary problem is Black culture and the fact that on net, a lot of people have negative experiences when they interact with Black people. And that monologue from Nick went viral. And it attracted a lot of attention. And he has a lot of Black fans who are following him and reacting to his content now. And so that's what the super chat was effectively about. And Nick responded to the super chat and he said, look, I'm not a hateful person. And I don't think most people are hateful insofar as it pertains to Black people. And he says, I was demeaned, I was slandered, I was, kicked while I was down, and I was labeled as the bad guy. But now that I've had the opportunity to grow and I've achieved a larger audience, now I have the ability to feel like the good guy. I have the ability to feel like the hero. And he was talking about how, being able to talk about the situation with Israel and Iran and Israel and Palestine, which are his real opinions, has allowed him to feel like a good guy and kind of cut his attachments to, this old feeling that he had about feeling like he needed to be the Joker or he needed to be the bad guy. He needed to play that role. He needed to lean into it. Now that he's been mainstreamed a little bit, it's been cathartic for him knowing that he can move away from that old image, that old reputation, that old persona, and rebrand himself into somebody that's a little bit more moderate, a little bit more reasonable, less extreme. And he reacted to that, and that was basically the first 10 minutes of the clip. But the last 5 minutes is what you really need to pay close attention to. And that's where he talks about how he's going to reform the Groyper movement and change it into something that's a bit more, like I said, all-encompassing. So we're going to go ahead and get into the reaction right now. Let's start at the 10-minute mark. Here we go.
Is twofold. Now that censorship and cancel culture has receded, here's the challenge. It is to translate a movement that was reactive and resentful into a movement that is progressive. And what I mean by that is, I'm not satisfied with where we are. How do we push ahead? Not based on grievance and resentment and revenge. How do we push ahead based on building an American society that we all want to live in?
Okay. Pay close attention to the language that he's using. Pay very close attention to the words and the language and the diction that he's using. He's using language that is about unity. It is about creating a bigger tent. It's about making the Groyper and America First movement more ubiquitous. He's saying, how do we make it more all-encompassing? How do we make it bigger? How do we make it more progressive? Pay close attention.
Rather than just being angry, anti-white, black people, rather than this kind of Matt Walsh, it's just a different flavor of racial resentment every night. The question is, what is the positive vision? How do we transmute that resentment into a positive vision for change and let go of a lot of that negative emotion? And it's not to say that we're not still aiming for a sovereign, independent country with white identity at the forefront. It's not really like changing the essential ingredients, but how do we make sure that the tone matches the moment? 10 years ago, we were really under the boot. And I don't think we should take our foot off the gas. But it's going to be kind of like a tricky thing to do to translate the politics of like a Charlottesville or a J6 into a politics of what if the future inventors and innovators and architects.
What he's talking about here is a radical transformation in the alt-right movement. It's not just about reactionary. It's not just about being reactionary. It's not just about fighting. It's not just about revenge. It's not just about anger. It's not just about rebellion, but it's about creation. It is about constructing something. It's about creating a platform that society operates on. It's about creating a template that society utilizes. It's about creating how do I put it? It's about creating this ideology that overlays the political conversation, the masses in the United States. It is about making America First and the Groyper movement something that is ubiquitous. So he's talking about radically transforming the way people think about politics as it pertains to his audience. That is what he is suggesting here, a radical transformation.
The actual visionaries are going to share our politics. The builders, the progressives, the people that want to move society forward. How do we keep our foot on the gas without leaning into bitterness? How do we let go of some of those emotions, the anger, and treat our former adversaries with a kind of beneficence, with a kind of magnanimity? Which is to say, in other words, like, we are the future. Everyone is a Groyper. Everyone is America First.
How do we treat our adversaries with a kind of beneficence and magnanimity? How do we create a future where everybody is a Groyper? Everybody is America First. This is ambitious, to say the least. And you guys are going to get an opportunity to witness how his audience reacted. It was not, well, maybe it is what a lot of you would have expected, but it was a pretty shocking reaction given how much Nick's audience loves him, how much Nick's audience is infatuated with him.
Our former foes, our former opponents, the black people, the white people, the Christians.
The black people, the white people, the Christians. That's a turnoff to his audience when you're saying, how do we appeal to black people? Because his audience hates black people. That's why.
Everybody else, how do we embrace them as part of
Not all of them, but a lot of them.
our larger agenda? How do we bring them in a way that doesn't compromise our values and our vision, but that is magnanimous, that is letting go of some of those negative feelings from before, because we have a bigger vision. You know, the vision is bigger than this cycle of political grievance. It's about, you know, really fundamentally transforming America in such a way that everyone will wake up one day and say, we're all Groypers now. We're all America first now. We've all been won over. And the new floor, the new consensus is the Groypers, in the same way that the liberals did, in the same way that other movements have in the past. That's the question, because if the movement cannot move on from the reactivity, if it can't initiate and be proactive, it will not survive. It cannot continue to merely be reactive. If it can't let go of some of these emotions, the down, the bitterness, the negativity, can't move forward.
There you go.
And I see this strain all the time. I think of guys like Matt Walsh, where every show is like one note, and every show is just like, fuck black people. Everyone's anti-white. Everything's racist. And I, like, on some level, I agree with it. I get it. That's how it's been. That's a righteous, legitimate feeling. At the same time, the kind of harping in that one note negative way, I don't think that's going to drive the conversation and society forward. It's too conservative. And by conservative, I don't mean ideologically. It's too, like, dispositionally conservative. So anyway, people are saying Nick got the call. If you're saying that, you're not understanding what I'm saying. I'm not saying we should change any part of our program. I'm saying that the tone and the evidence is already.
Yeah, and his audience is already saying that he got the call. He's going soft, right? That's kind of what the takeaway from many members of his audience, many members of his movement is. It's that he's going soft. He is watering the movement down. He is selling out effectively.
There. When people watch my show, even if they disagree, I can play to my audience of core supporters. I can also play to an audience of people that should hate me, and they may continue to hate me. But a lot of them are going to hear my message and say, oh, this is actually uplifting. This is actually a positive vision. This isn't what I thought. This isn't just resentment. This isn't just a kind of reactive message. People are saying this is a vision that is all-encompassing that I can get behind. It's holistic.
All-encompassing,
so,
holistic.
You know, most people are not going to understand what I mean by that because most people cannot think conceptually, but I will continue to demonstrate what I'm talking about and you will see the results. So sort of what I've been doing all this time. It's all in the approach. Everything is in the approach. So important, so subtle.
He's a strategist.
The proof of the pudding is in the eating. But anyway, so that's
there. You go. All right. So basically the gist of what he's saying is the America First, the alt-right movement traditionally has spent too much time focused on grievance-based politics. It has spent too much time centered on frustration, on anger, on revenge, on bitterness, on feelings of negativity towards non-whites, you know? And the only way for this movement to actually succeed, the only way for this movement to actually become ubiquitous is to remove, to cleave those elements off of the America First brand, off of the America First strain of thinking, because if it doesn't eliminate those elements, it will never be able to go mainstream. It's too radical, it is too extreme, it is too centered in hatred and resentment and anger, and that will necessarily kill the movement. It is a suicidal element. It is a parasite. I don't know if parasitical is a word, but it's a parasite, effectively. This kind of Wignat, extremist, comically ultra far right element of the America First movement. It is like a parasite. It is going to kill the movement effectively. And let me just read to you the way his audience responded, because Fuentes is known for having a cult of personality. He's known for being this kind of supreme leader, right? That's how his audience views him. That's how he's regarded by his audience. He is held in high regard by these people. They view him as intellectual, as charismatic, as well-informed, as articulate. And many of those things are true. But his audience did a complete 180 after seeing this video. Let me read you some of these comments. So the first comment at the top with 249 likes said, "That's what a Jew would say after killing your entire family," basically insinuating that Nick is saying something that you would hear from a Jew, to forgive your enemies, to welcome them in after they killed all the white people, effectively. This guy says, "So what are you going to do, Nick? Water down your views to become more inclusive and grow your audience/business like Alex Jones has done? I think it's too early in the fight to be thinking of forgiving our enemies or to have your faith restored in people," in quotation marks. This person says, "I disagree with how Nick approaches things. I am racist. Black people are a disease," in all caps. "I live and grew up in Switzerland. I was always against racism against black people and whoever else, but then in recent years, our government made the decision of welcoming countless African migrants. Since then, I have been sexually harassed countless times by them. Sorry to hear that. They get easily very violent. I learned the hard way, you can't even make eye contact. They are ready to kill you if you just do that. They destroyed my peace of mind. I had to buy pepper spray and carry it with me everywhere. I imagine the situation is a lot worse in America with black people. I heard there are areas/towns where people don't even dare step out of their cars. There is nothing good that comes out of living with those retarded baboons. They only know how to destroy, not to build, ship them back to Africa." 153 likes on that comment. And I'm just going to go through a couple more just so I can really drill the idea in. This person says, "I don't want to move forward with blacks. I want to move on. It isn't worth the effort to ally them. If they want to work against the Jew, that's great, so long as they do it without expecting whites to be involved." This person says, "The F. This only works with a handful of people who have some brains and some decency. There are still shitloads of people, excuse me for my language, of people who want us and our families dead and laugh when we get disenfranchised from society. How the F are we supposed to move forward with them?" 95 likes on that. This person says, "Is it too much to ask for a leader to not backpedal and turn into a PUSSY, like WTF is this SHIT? Nobody wants us to just all get along now." 88 likes. All right, I think you guys get the idea. The entire comment section under this video is flooded with negative reactions to what Nick is saying. And let me just say this. Let me just put my take out there on what I think about the America First movement. Here's the deal. The bottom line is Nick has effectively painted himself into a corner. And this is the reason why I don't engage in hyper-partisan and dissident and extremist politics, because I think it's suicidal. I think it's ineffectual. And the primary reason why is because once you brand yourself as somebody who is known for being extreme, someone who's known for being radical, someone who's known for going against the grain all the time, once you brand yourself as that kind of person, the audience expects you to continually engage in these evocative, in these kinds of provocative monologues. They want you to continue to say things that are extreme. They want you to continue to say things that are politically insensitive, politically incorrect. They want you to be racist. They want you to be misogynistic. They want you to be anti-Semitic, whatever. And it's kind of a bonding ritual, right? Because these people are not welcomed into mainstream politics. They are not welcomed into polite society. And so they have to band together in these kinds of communities in order to feel seen, in order to feel a sense of community with other neo-Nazi adjacent far-right types. These people are not politically savvy. These people are not interested in policy. They're not interested in statecraft. This is like a tribal ritual. This is like I said, it's bonding. It's community building around these kinds of negative sentiments because they have nowhere else to discharge those feelings. And so they rally behind somebody like Nick who will, sing to the choir, preach to the choir, say the things that they want to hear, placate their racist, anti-Semitic inclinations on a nightly basis. And the moment he wants to transition away from that into something that's more amicable, into something that's a little bit more pure and refined, that's when the entire audience rebels. That's when the entire audience revolts against him. And it is very interesting. And the reason I say that is because, look, I consider myself America first. Like, I'm a conservative. I consider myself America first. I don't like the fact that we're fighting wars on behalf of Israel. I don't like the fact that I feel like our foreign policy and our government is being controlled by other foreign governments at the expense of the United States. Yeah, I don't like the fact that our country is controlled by private interest and defense contractors and oil companies. I don't like the fact that our country is controlled by Palantir and Peter Thiel and all these oligarchs in Silicon Valley. And I like the fact that Nick constantly calls that out. But the problem really is, at the end of the day, Nick does cast this long shadow because he says a lot of things that are good. You got to fight the deep state. We got to call out Israel. We have to call out, the neocons and Jewish influence on United States foreign policy. We have to call out Elon Musk. We have to call out people like Tucker and Candace. I think all of that is on the money. I am with him on all of that. All of that is, it's perfect. I love to hear it. But like I said, he casts this long shadow with all these ridiculously racist things that he says and that he has said in the past. And he constantly placates his audience by saying these things because he doesn't want to lose his core audience. And I'm sure he's aware of that. I'm sure if he moderates himself too much and goes too far into the middle, he will lose his core audience. And that's what I mean when I say he's painted himself into a corner. But that's the reason why it's hard for me to fully trust Nick Fuentes because, as I said earlier, this is a guy who has said black people are a permanent underclass. Their economic destiny is poverty. They don't know how to build civilization. They are low IQ. They are savage. They are, tribal. And he says these things as a pejorative. And he says things like, that's brown coded, or he uses the word brown, which is to refer to someone's race or skin tone, as a pejorative term. And that obviously gets his audience jumping up and down and clapping their hands like dolphins, like seals. And that is effectively my problem with him, because it is strange to me how can somebody do a complete 180 like that? How can somebody go from saying that having sex with a black person is like having sex with a dog, race mixing is degenerate, which I take offense to because it's like, I am mixed race, I am biracial. And it's like, how do you say all those things? How do you constantly drill that into your audience's mind? How do you build a platform on these kinds of, extremist and primordial racist ideas, and then expect one day for your audience to kind of just drop all that to band together with you to bring in black people and bring in Hispanics? That doesn't even make sense. That's like obviously a recipe for disaster. And so, that's effectively my position on America First. Like, I consider myself America First. And I think, like I said, a lot of the things Nick says are on the money. But then he has all these other absurd beliefs and all these other absurd views. And he's hanging out with Richard Spencer. And he hung out with James Alsop. And he went to Charlottesville in 2017. And it's like, why? Why are you associating with people like that? You can refine and purify your movement, or you can just placate these neo-Nazis effectively. You can't do both, though. You have to do one or the other. You're either a Groyper or America First, but you can't be both. And that's effectively my criticism of the America First movement. It plays way too much into white supremacy or people who believe in white supremacy. I don't know if Nick is a white supremacist. I couldn't care less. I think he probably is. Or in all likelihood, he believes many of the things that white supremacists believe, and he's a little bit too close to a white supremacist for my preference. But whether or not he is, the fact of the matter is that he builds a core audience of people who are white supremacists, who are Wignats. And that's the concern. I can't band together with people like that. It would be against my own interest to do so. It would be at my own detriment. And the problem is with these white supremacist types, they hide their power level and they act friendly and they act normal. They water themselves down. They hide their power level, so to speak. But then you have people like Richard Spencer who believe in abortion because it kills more black people and brown people than it kills white people, which gives white people a leg up in the race war, which, for a lack of better terms, is this battle for civilization as they see it, because they discuss race in antagonistic terms. They analyze race relations through this kind of antagonistic framework. And so they view black people and brown people having children in America as inherently threatening to white people or the white demographic or the white majority. So that's why somebody like Richard Spencer supports abortion. And to me, there is nothing more. I don't like dipping into Christian coping. I don't really think it's particularly responsible or rhetorically effective. But if anything were to be described as satanic or demonic, it is that. It is Richard Spencer believing abortion should be legal because it kills black and brown people disproportionately. Like, that's pretty sick. And you have Nick, who is buddy-buddy with a guy like that, or at least he was at one point. And, I mean, these are the kinds of people in his camp. You know, you had Patrick Casey with Identity Europa. You had Richard Spencer. And these guys are just flat-out race idolaters. I don't think Nick is, but these guys are race idolaters, and that is weird. You have people in Nick's camp, in America First, who are race idolaters. A lot of them. They're not an insignificant minority. I've read the comments under many of his videos. You have people saying, we should deport all black people back to Africa. We should relocate all black people to the sun. It would be better for society. And to be honest, I don't care, because I'm proud to be brown. You know, I'm proud to be brown, and I have no shame in my features whatsoever. And I don't think anybody should at all. White, black, brown, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, you have these people who are these race idolaters. They are obsessed with white people. They are obsessed with white genetics. They are obsessed with the white race in such a way where it's like creepy almost. And the thing is, whether you like it or not, these quote-unquote white nationalists, many of them are really just white ethnostaters. They just use white nationalists because it's a more polite term. It is a more respectable term. But the distance between white nationalist and white ethnostater, it is a distinction worth making. It really is, because a white nationalist is more so about preserving demographics, and a white ethnostater is about removing non-whites. So it is a significant distinction that needs to be made. But the bottom line is that it really is, in many regards, a hop, skip, and a jump to go from white nationalist to just full-blown white ethnostater. And the thing is, I think to myself, you know, what Nick is doing is smart. And I'll tell you why. Nick is smart enough to understand that if he wants to preserve his career in politics, and not be completely slandered or shut out of potentially ingratiating himself further into the conservative political ecosystem and having the ability to reach into the next generation of young adults. In order to do that, in order to preserve his career, he's going to need to avoid some of these tripwires with this explicitly racist language. And like he says, it's all in the tone, it's all in the approach. And so Nick understands wisely that this idea of a white ethno-state, it's not even worth talking about. It's almost so delusional that it's like talking about it makes you look like a nut job. Talking about that makes you look like a wacko when you start talking about a white ethno-state. And the reason why is rather straightforward. You know, if you just look at the logistics of it, right? Let's just say for the sake of argument, okay, the wet dream of the white ethno-stater is we go on a crusade against all non-whites. That includes white Hispanics. So we go on a crusade against all non-whites. We bar them from holding public office and we bar them from voting. We repeal, Title II, Title V, Title VII under the Civil Rights Act. We overturn all these legal precedents so that we can legally segregate and bar doing business from, or at least allow businesses to bar particular customers, refuse them service, refuse them housing, refuse them service at a particular restaurant. Let's say all that happens, right? How long do you think you can sustain that status quo for without a rebellion? How long do you think you can repress the rights of 110 million people without a full-blown rebellion? That sounds actually that actually sounds ridiculous to me. There's 350 million people in America. 110 million of that 350 million are not white. And I just have no idea how you would expect in the long run to suppress or repress the rights of these groups and that many people without some kind of revolt, without some kind of rebellion. There's just no way. It is literally impossible. You would have to create a full-blown police state, a full-blown surveillance state, deploy military, and mobilize local municipalities to every black, brown, Asian neighborhood in all 50 states and keep them under a permanent surveillance state to constantly monitor their behavior. And that is incredibly expensive, and that is politically divisive, and that would, in any normal circumstance, that would lead to a civil war. We saw it already with slavery. We've seen it in other countries. That would, in all likelihood, at some point lead to a civil war. You would have liberals who disaffect from this pro-white cause. You'd even probably have a lot of conservatives who defect, rather. So even logistically, this whole white ethno-state, this wet dream, it's actually insane. It actually makes zero sense whatsoever. And all these race idolaters in Nick's community, in the Groyper movement in America First, who think that it's actually logistically possible to achieve a white ethno-state in a country with 350 million people, half of them being women, and 110 million of those people not being white, it's actually crazy to me. Furthermore, the reality of the situation is that a lot of the people who are in this camp, who are in this white ethno-state, are also hyper-traditional. They are hyper-traditionalist, which means they don't want women working. They don't want women on OnlyFans. They don't want women to have careers. They want women barefoot in the kitchen. Okay, that is what they want from their women. So then not only are they going to repress the rights of non-white people, but they're also going to repress the rights of white women, which is even more politically unpopular. I mean, you're touching all kinds of third rails here. There's no way you do this without a violent coup of the federal government. Otherwise, what do you even think? What are you even talking about? Unless you have the means to violently overthrow the federal government of the United States, which is the strongest country on earth, you will never achieve your white ethno-state. You will die and never realize that dream. So Nick is doing these guys a favor by trying to mainstream their views. And the fact that these guys aren't jumping up and down, getting behind his movement, is bewildering to me. if you actually just sit down and think about it for 2 seconds, you will realize immediately that a white ethno-state will never be realized in the United States of America. It is politically untenable. And even if you achieve it, it would inevitably lead to a civil war. So what is the point? To just destroy this country for the sake of it because you're pro-white just to be pro-white? You haven't even thought about why? You're just a race idolater? That's weird. That's like strange. So that's just my 2 cents on his movement and all these freaks and all these Wignats in his movement that he wants to purge. But beyond that, look, when I think about it critically, when I sit down and think critically about Nick and my views on him, despite the fact that I think in comparison to all these neo-Nazis, Nick Fuentes is better, which is a low bar to set, admittedly, regardless, it's hard for me to trust the guy. And I'll tell you why. The reason why is because, you can't just change your tune whenever it suits you. You can't just change your tune or change your beliefs on a dime whenever the wind is blowing a different direction. He did the same thing with Kanye. He went from saying that he's a fan of Kanye and he's loyal to Kanye to saying that, oh, I'm not loyal to Kanye anymore because Kanye is claiming that he's a god, and then he goes back to hanging out with Kanye. That's like wishy-washy. And, he does those kinds of things which raise my suspicions. But even beyond that, you also can't go from saying that, well, I guess it's a slightly different point, but you can't go from saying that black people are a parasite on society. Black people bring the third world to the United States. They bring the third world to America and then try to build a coalition with black people to bring them into America first. Like, to me, that's just like, it doesn't even make sense. Those are contradictory messages. So that's one of the reasons why I don't trust him. But even then, to me, the way I see it, and this might just be my own cynicism, but the bottom line is, look, to my mind, you can't go from, how do I put it? How do I put this? I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Anyways, the point I was trying to make there was it's hard to do a complete 180. It is hard to do a complete 180. And this might be cynical. Oh, here's what I was going to say. This might be cynical, but look, the way I'm looking at this is Nick understands and very acutely and very, it is important to have this ability to perceive. It is important to be aware and to be diligent and to be discerning. And I think Nick is all those things. And now that Nick has kind of reached a point where he's more or less a household name, he's become one of the most popular political commentators in the United States. And now that he realizes he's broken into the mainstream, he understands that because he has spent so much time, he has basically made an entire career off of doing ultra far right politics. He understands that he cannot afford to lose his core audience. And his core audience are these young, angry, disaffected, ultra far right white men. And if he loses that audience, he loses everything. Literally everything. Those are the people who have supported him through thick and thin, through everything, through the deplatformings, through the censorship, through the slandering, through being subpoenaed by Congress, through being put on a no-flight list, everything. His community was there. They were the ones buying the merch. It's not regular people, it's not mainstream conservatives who are buying his merch, and it's definitely not liberals. It's these far-right young men. They are the ones subscribing to his platforms. They are the one who are sending in super chats. They are the ones who are buying his merch. And if he alienates that audience too much, he could risk losing everything. He could risk losing his main source of income. And he can't afford to do that. He's not in a position to do that. Based on everything he said, he's in a position where he has to pay off. He has lawsuits and legal fees or whatever that he has to worry about. Apparently, he's in debt, and so he can't afford to alienate his audience right now. So that might be cynical, and I'm sure on some level, this transition, this desire to reform himself, to rebrand himself, to transform the movement is genuine. I believe that. I believe he's genuine in his desire to want to change the movement. But at the same time, why now? Now that you're becoming mainstream, now that you've been brought back into the fold, now that your name is in the headlines, now that people are talking about you, now you want to change all of a sudden. Now you want to change your tune. Now you want to, change your approach. It's all a bit suspicious is all I'm saying. And that's why it's hard for me to trust him. My instincts are telling me, I don't know if you can trust this guy. Because I understand very clearly, this is a slightly separate point, but I understand very clearly that in the game of politics, it's a dirty game. I used to think that politics, it was about ideology. It was about being ideological, taking the high road. You have this team, it's this camp versus this camp. You're on that side, I'm on this side, like team sports effectively. But then you begin to realize that that's not actually what it is. A lot of times in politics, and excuse the expression, but a lot of times in politics, you do have to make these Faustian bargains. You do have to make coalitions with people who you don't like, who you don't view as permanent members of your community, who you view as insufferable in effect. You have to learn to build coalitions with those people. You have to learn to join forces with those people to achieve something bigger, to achieve something greater, to achieve a vision that both of you want to realize. Sometimes you have to make those sacrifices and have to make those compromises. Sometimes you do have to work with these kinds of people whose politics you might find distasteful. That is just a part of the game. That's a part of politics. And you see this all the time. You see bipartisan legislation. You see bipartisan support with the Freedom Caucus and with the Democrats to force the United States federal government to release the Epstein files, to hold Trump accountable. You have these House Select Committees where you have bipartisan support for a particular policy on a foreign country. That's a part of the game. You have people like AOC who necessarily have to work with the neoliberals because those people are the establishment. Those people are the center of power in the Democratic Party, regardless of whether you like it or not. That is just the truth. It is not Zoran Mamdani. It is not AOC. It is not Rashida Tlaib. It is not Bernie Sanders. Those people are just radicals. Those people, not really, but those people by moderate standards are considered radicals. But those people are not where the locus of power is centered in the Democratic Party. It is centered with Nancy Pelosi. It is centered with Elizabeth Warren. It is centered with people like Joe Biden. That's where the power is located. And AOC understands correctly that if she wants to keep her seat, that if she wants to be politically effective, she will have to sign bills. She will have to sign motions to send more weapons to Israel, even if it's incredibly unpopular amongst the Democratic Party. If you are an ideological Puritan, if you purity spiral all the time, you will never get that far in politics. You will never achieve anything. You will never accomplish what you want. That is a part of the game. That is how politics is. You have to work with people who you don't like. And on some level, I would be willing to work with somebody like Nick. I would be. But it would have to come at the cost of recanting many of his statements, disavowing many of the things that he said in the past, and explicitly disavowing and calling out the most fringe and extreme elements of his audience. Otherwise, it would never work. It would just be too big of a risk. It would be too much of an ask. And, you know, I understand that politics is a dirty game, and there's a lot of deception, there's a lot of misdirection. That's just baked into the cake, that's baked into the pie. But you got to hold the line somewhere. You have to draw a line in the sand at some point with some people. That's just how it is. So, anyways, that's my take. I do believe the America First movement can survive. I do believe the America First movement is a radical change to politics that we need. I am an accelerationist. I am somebody who wants to see change. I am somebody who wants to affect change. I am somebody who wants to see the deep state torn, broken into a trillion pieces, smashed into a trillion pieces. And I want this country to be reformed. I want infrastructure bills. I want contractual housing arrangements for young Americans, for young men who are living in their parents' basements, where they sign a contract for housing, and in exchange, they give up their labor to the government to work somewhere for a year or two. These are the kinds of things that we want in society. We want smart cities. We want beautiful roads. We want beautiful, clean cities. We want low crime. We want homelessness to be dealt with. We want to reform the prison system. There's all kinds of stuff that we can work on here. We want to improve race relations, whatever. We want to build a more unified society. And I'm all on board with that message. But I do draw the line when it comes to white ethnostaters, white idolaters, and white nationalists who use that term to cloak their true beliefs and their true opinions. If you want to talk about shutting down the border, if you want to talk about an immigration moratorium and not letting in people who are unintelligent or unqualified, only letting in people with H-1B visas, with O-1 visas, people who have the ability to contribute something meaningful to the United States, who are talented, I'm all on board with that. I am in favor of that. I can work with that. But all this race idolatry, all this we need to limit. I mean, there are people in this comment section who are saying we should limit black birth, or we should limit black people to only being allowed to have one child policy for black families. When you have people like that in your community and your movement, and you have people who are saying things like we should ban race mixing, that's when you lose me. Because I don't think politics should influence people's relationship decisions. That feels like a ridiculous overreach. That feels like a mass overreach. Incredibly draconian. It would create such a depressing society. And I'll cap off with this. This is the last thing I'm going to say because I've been going on for a while here. The last thing I'm going to say is this. I am somebody who is conservative in disposition. The reason why is because I was born in Diamond Bar, California, which is a like 70%, 80% Asian neighborhood. So I grew up in this slow, not much going on Asian neighborhood. And then I moved to a small town in Texas called Kingwood, where I spent 11 years of my life. And it influenced my politics. It influenced my identity. It influenced the way I think. It shaped who I am as a person today. But even in these very conservative areas, even in places like Diamond Bar, even in especially places like Kingwood, Texas, these places where people wear their Oakley glasses and their Vineyard Vines button-up shirts and their Sperry's and their white Nike crew socks with their Sperry's. And they're wearing cargo shorts and short shorts that are made by Polo Ralph Lauren, and they're wearing these ridiculous Under Armour button-up t-shirts. Even in places like that where these people are ultra conservative and they go fishing on the weekend and hunting on the weekend and camping, and they go down to Galveston for spring break. They go down to Galveston for spring break. Even in the most stereotypically southern white areas, even in those places you have liberals. Even in those places you have these people who have these ultra conservative dispositions. People who are somewhat bigoted, even they like liberalism. Even they like having their Latina girlfriend or their black girlfriend or their Asian girlfriend. Even these guys like listening to hip-hop music, to alternative music. Even these guys like wearing their Travis Scott Nike shoes, their Yeezy 350s, their t-shirts that are made by some streetwear brand on Instagram that costs like 70 or 80 bucks. And they like wearing their oversized Fear of God Essentials hoodies, even in these conservative places. These guys like having, these guys like participating or partaking in certain elements of fashion that is inspired by black people. They like being able to choose the race of their girlfriend, of their partner, even in these super conservative areas. So if you think you can actually completely deconstruct liberalism in the United States, which is one of the most influential and ubiquitous political ideologies of the 20th and 21st century, and replace it with something so draconian as white supremacy, where everybody looks at the world through the lens of race, you are sorely mistaken. That is not a fight you will ever win in a trillion years. You might have these reactionaries, you might have these rebels who go and shoot up a grocery store or crash a van into a school or something like that, these nut jobs. You might have those people, these ultra far right freaks on 4chan and on the internet who conspire to blow up hospitals or blow up black churches or whatever. But normal, reasonable people, even Trumpists, even conservatives, look at you guys as nut jobs. I'll just be honest. Even in these very conservative areas, completely abandoning liberalism and, elements of black culture and black music and the ability to choose the race of the partner you're with, even in those areas, that is not popular. And I've witnessed it. I've seen it firsthand. So anyways, that's my take on the whole situation, on this whole infighting in the Groyper movement, in the America First movement. It is very telling. It is very emblematic. And I'm interested to see how this develops, especially in the coming years, especially with what we're going to see in 2028 with the next election cycle with J.D. Vance and Gavin Newsom, because that's going to be the battle for the future. It's going to be Nick Fuentes versus J.D. Vance and his network, 1789 Capital, Rockbridge, the BAP network, Bari Weiss. You get the idea. Tucker Carlson now, because he gets his money from 1789 Capital, which got its money from Peter Thiel. So that's going to be the fight. It is going to be America First and the Groypers versus the new right, J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel. And I'm excited to see how that unfolds. And I want to see the America First movement burgeon into something better, something less primordial. But until it does, I can't call myself a Groyper. And that's my criticism of the America First movement. If you guys like this video, please like, please subscribe, please share, and please comment. I want to discuss this with you guys further in the comment section, see what you guys have to say about it. This was just an unfiltered, raw take, no script. This is just my opinion on the whole thing as I give you guys the play-by-play as I kind of watch where the wind is blowing. But that's all I have to say. So until further ado, I am out. Thank you guys.